It was definitely a very controversial move when the Kansas City Chiefs decided to trade their first and second round picks just to get Frank Clark, who obviously is a great player, but giving up a first and second round pick and then also having to pay Frank Clark a huge contract, it's definitely a bit controversial, especially when you let a very good pass rusher in Dee Ford just walk in free agency. Now, I think definitely there's a huge difference between Clark and Ford. Clark is pretty much just as good of an edge rusher as Ford, but is also just more of a complete player, whereas Ford, he kind of just rushes the passer. That's all he does. Whereas Clark can help you out in the run game, he can help you out in containing the quarterback. There's several things he can do. Ford pretty much just has his speed, which is still valuable, but it's not as valuable as Clark. However, letting a guy walk and then trading a first and second round pick for a player in a similar position who at the time was perceived to be a similar talent and also having to pay him a lot more money, it's definitely going to get people to scratch some heads. However, I think it's working out very well for Kansas City. I mean, when Clark's on the field, he is just playing at a dynamic level. But I also feel like the stats only tell part of the story. I mean, you look at his overall log line of the last game against the Chargers, he had 1 sack and 1 forced fumble and 5 total tackles, which it's okay, but it's definitely nothing spectacular. But I really did feel like his performance in Mexico, it was a great example of why you have to watch the tape, because what he put on tape was just so significant compared to just what his stats were. He really took over that game, and it was mostly in the pass rush game, but it was also some in the running game as well. Like, this play was just an absurd play. It's a display of showing how superhuman Frank Clark is, really. Los Angeles is going to have their tight end, Hunter Henry, be the guy who's blocking Clark. And, you know, Hunter Henry, he's not a terrible blocker, but he's definitely more known for his pass catching. And so, Frank Clark, if you have Hunter Henry going against you, you have to take advantage of this matchup. One thing you're going to see Clark do first is, it's a little bit hard to tell from this angle, but he's going to get his left arm and kind of put it onto the right shoulder area of Henry, and from there he's just going to use all strength here. Watch how he pushes him down as though he's a villain in a superhero movie and then goes over and makes the tackle. I mean, what do you even say about that? That's just an absurdly talented play. He just straight up manhandled a very big guy in Hunter Henry and then was able to run over and make a tackle. I mean, that's why they traded a first and a second round pick for him, because he's trying to make the argument that he should be worth 2 first-round picks. I mean, the talent he can bring to a football team is just fantastic. Again, you can say he wasn't worth the trade, he wasn't worth the contract, whatever. He's still a fantastic player, and I'm sure the Chiefs are very happy to have him. And also, should be mentioned, not all first and second round picks are created equal. They would have had very late first and second round picks, so I actually don't think the picks matter too much. You can debate the contract if you want, but even with that, I do feel like if his play isn't meeting up to his contract, it's certainly getting in a pretty similar area. So I do think that when he's on, he is worth any amount of money. Like, one thing he does have is the speed. Like, on a play like this, is he's going to be going up just one-on-one against the left tackle, and so watch what happens right when this ball is snapped. Notice how wide of an angle he takes. Watch how he goes basically just straight up, essentially. It's tough, because now if you see that tackle, obviously he's not in a great position to block you out of the way in terms of just stopping you, but he could potentially push you behind Rivers, and then you wouldn't be able to make the play if you are Frank Clark. So there definitely is some negatives and positives to doing something like this. Sometimes you would have to worry about giving up containment, but you don't have to be quite as worried when you are playing a guy like Phillip Rivers. It's still something that should be in the back of your head, but Rivers isn't exactly the guy who's going to be running around too much, so you can play it a little bit more aggressively against a guy like Rivers. So for Trey Pipkins, their backup left tackle, typically what you would want to do in this situation is just try to push him past the quarterback. You know, it's essentially just one push, more or less. It's very different than a typical situation. You just want to just push him out of the way, but he's not going to be able to do it. Clark's able to blow by him, get to Rivers, knock the ball out, and it ends up getting ruled interception as opposed to a forced fumble. So he doesn't actually get credit for the play, but he definitely was the one who made the play. You know, the stats won't back it up, except for he gets a pressure for it, but clearly what he did there was he was the one who set up that interception. I'm sure he probably wishes it was ruled a sack and a forced fumble, but at the end of the day, you got to just be happy with the fact that you made a play that helps your team. So I thought that play was kind of a good example of showing that he does have the speed, but he also has the power where he's a hard guy to push around, but then also he has the speed to get around you, which is what makes him one of the best defensive end or edge rushers in the NFL. He's in that top 10 category for sure. But there was also another play I liked, which was this one, where he's going up, again, one-on-one against a left tackle, and at first he's going to try to use his power to get past him. As you see, he doesn't worry about trying to get around him. He's going to initiate this contact, see if he can just overpower his assigned man. But it's not going to work out. I mean, give credit to Pipkins on this one. He did a good job of holding his own and, pushing Clark back, so now Clark has to try it again. At this point, it didn't work the first time, so, a lot of guys would just try to do the same thing again, but Clark's kind of saying, hey, I'm not going to just keep running my head into a wall and hope it falls down. It didn't work out, let's try something else. So instead, he'll just reach his left arm out, slap Pipkins' hand, get around him, and get to Rivers, who that ends up actually creating what should have been interception. It didn't work out. Tyrann Mathieu looked like me out there, basically. It was just, you got to make that catch. He had an interception earlier in the game. You do have to make that catch. He's a great player. I won't get on him too much. It does happen, but the fact that Clark was able to set up what should have been an easy interception, that's just kind of going to show the game-breaking talent this guy has. The fact that he can really take over a game, and that's what I thought he did against the Chargers. I thought that Clark was the MVP of that game, even though they have last year's MVP, Patrick Mahomes. The Kansas City Chiefs are definitely far from a complete football team. They have their holes, but in the areas where they need star players, they have star players. In terms of quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, their offense is obviously good. But then on the defense, they also have Tyrann Mathieu. They have Frank Clark, guys who can take over the game. So even though they also have some positions of players that aren't necessarily the best, they have enough good players to make it work. Some of you then might argue, okay, well, sure, Frank Clark is great. Frank Clark can make some very good plays, but couldn't you just start chipping him and take him out of the game, and then you don't really have to worry about him too much? Yeah, it hurts you a little bit in terms of you have to use a player to chip him, but at the end of the day, you'd rather double team Clark than just get beat by him every play. And while that is true, it doesn't mean that Clark can't be effective even on double teams. Like on this, he's going to get chipped by the halfback, and also the right tackle will be the one who's primarily blocking him. But for one thing, notice how far he gets to that edge right off the bat. So for the tackle, he has to completely lunge out to make this play. Of course, he's okay with getting beat to that side of the field because he knows he has help behind him, but he would still like to not be getting beat this badly necessarily. You look at it and you say, well, hey, it's not the end of the world. Ekeler can come in, he'll lay a blow on Clark, he'll probably get Clark back over in between the guard and the tackle in that direction, so that way the tackle will then have better hand placement and better feet placement to make this play. But Clark knows that as well. He knows that Ekeler is going to try to hit him towards the middle of the field. So he's just going to do a spin move here. And watch this footwork, how he's able to do that spin move, turn around, and actually ends up knocking the ball out of Philip Rivers' hands. Looked like Rivers was getting ready to throw it, so that's kind of what happened there. But that's just an incredible play to have the footwork to be able to pull something like that off. While getting hit, then spin over to the other side of the field, and then also be able to know exactly where you are and where you have to run to make a play on Rivers. It's not easy to do, but he kind of made it look easy, didn't he? And even though the Chargers came back and were within one play of potentially tying this game, they were able to get a crucial interception, and part of it was set up by what Clark did. This is the biggest play of the game, and Clark definitely had a huge positive impact for Kansas City. It's once again him going up against the left tackle, and notice what he's going to do right when the ball is snapped. Notice how he gets low like that, and also notice how far he gets around Pipkins. Again, very similar to that first play I showed you. Pipkins can try to push him around Rivers, but typically it's not going to be a very easy thing to do. Clark is a strong guy. You can push him somewhat around Rivers, but you can't push him that much around him. And because of that, Clark is going to be able to create some pressure. Rivers has to step up before he makes a throw, and makes a poor throw. And I do have to think that him throwing while a little bit off balance was the difference in him making an accurate throw and him underthrowing it, which led to an easy interception. As you see, taking a couple of steps up while you're throwing, that's not what Rivers likes to do. It's what he kind of had to do in that situation, and I do think it negatively affected him. I also, on a little bit of a side note, I liked how Clark didn't actually create any contact even though he was close. Once he realized, I don't have to make any contact, he kind of put his hands up and didn't do anything. That's a very smart play because we've all seen some very ticky-tacky things get called pass interference. Don't even put yourself in that position if you don't have to. If you don't have to touch him, don't touch him, and Clark didn't touch him on that play. So, yeah, that's kind of what Clark brings to the table for Kansas City. There absolutely are other guys that are going to get more sacks. I do feel like this season hasn't necessarily been a totally strong year for Clark. He's had his ups and downs, but these past few games, he's definitely turning into the elite guy that they traded for. At the end of the day, there's only a few guys that are capable of taking over a football game in terms of people that aren't quarterbacks, and he's one of those guys. He's on the short list. He's a dynamic player, and he is a ton of fun to watch. So yeah, that's what I thought of Frank Clark's performance on Monday Night Football. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.